Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Recently, I've been asked what are the social implications of my work. I think that singlehood studies and aloneness studies can be a very radical kind of literature and form of thinking. For example, why do we need to be adults? Why do we need to be significant? Why do we need to be flexible of our time? Let's use the single vantage point to rethink the value system through which single people are stereotyped and stigmatized. Let's rethink the value system which evaluates us and change it. Let's use this vantage point that, single people offer to rethink the system, just as queer theory has done.
Oh my goodness. I have chills right now. Like I'm about to cry. Welcome back. This is the first half of a special episode, one that gave me chills, not once, but twice. I'm joined by guest co-host Iris Schneider, a fellow solo and behavioral scientist, to talk to Kinneret Lahad, a sociologist who does research at the intersection of time and singlehood. There's so much to say about this episode. Here are some of the topics that we covered in this one or in the sequel. We talk about what is the sociology of time and how our perceptions of time are influenced by the prominence of the relationship escalator and how this affects women in particular, often left either waiting hopefully or waiting hopelessly to ride it. Related to waiting, we talk about how people who are waiting are often lacking power. Another interesting topic was the purported moral superiority of people who have a family. That is, they are morally good people because they are doing hard work. And in turn, if having a family does not mean that you are an adult, we ask the question, what does it mean to be an adult? And Iris's answer to that question is brilliant. If indeed this transformation of becoming an adult means that you have to give up childish things, lest you be accused of being frozen in time, a la Peter Pan, it does beg the question, if childhood is so great, why are we giving up so much of it? Finally, there's this notion of where to find freedom. And I'll give you a hint at the answer, and that may be in your mind. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Kinneret Lahad. Kinneret is a senior lecturer at NCJW, Women and Gender Studies program at Tel Aviv University. Her research interests are interdisciplinary, spanning the fields of gender studies, sociology, and cultural studies. She's the author of the open access book, though I bought it and you should too, called A Table for One, a critical reading of singlehood, gender, and time, which is the focus of the podcast today. Welcome, Kinneret.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm thrilled you're here. And we are joined by a new guest co-host, no pressure, Iris Schneider. Iris is a behavioral scientist from the Netherlands. After obtaining her PhD in psychology, she lived and worked in the U.S. before starting her academic position at the Social and Economic Cognition Research Group at the University of Cologne in Germany. She studies mixed feelings and conflict in judgment and choice, which I suspect will be relevant to the topic of today's podcast. Welcome, Iris.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I want to tackle this topic of what I call waiting. And just to preview that for a second, this idea that a lot of singles, I think, are living in what we might call a liminal space, waiting for a better life of sorts. And Kinneret's done, I think, the cutting edge work on this topic and why she's joining us. But before we do that, I want to talk to both of you about how you got here. Why do you find yourself on the Solo podcast? So, Kinneret, how did you come to study this topic? Like, What's the origin story of this research project?
Wow, there are so many, and each time I choose a different one. We have
Give us all of them. I want them all.
I think one departure point is that I was fascinated by the study of family life. And at some point in my academic career, I realized that I want to study families. And in particular, what intrigued my curiosity is how, despite so many stories of family crises and family problems and disappointments of family life, still the ideal of family life and coupledom is so strong. And what makes it so strong, despite so many realities, everyday realities, which point otherwise? So why do we still cling to that ideal and not to other ideals? Well, I began my PhD researching compassion and compassion as an emotion, and I thought I would pursue a research that would be involved more in humanitarian aid and compassion and a cultural studies kind of approach to representations of international aid. But at some point, I realized that I've answered most of the questions I was interested when I wrote my graduate thesis, and I wasn't curious anymore. And as a single woman at that time, as I am today, I felt that there is no literature which represents a complexity of single life, that it either pathetic or it is either celebratory. It is either glamorous or it is either a catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And I said, I want to theorize singlehood. I want to understand singlehood. At that point, I realized that, first of all, that the studies I've read about singlehood were very descriptive, not very theoretically engaged. And the second problem was that they were quite binary. Well, that's actually my criticism today on some scholarship on that topic. But at that point, it was usually kind of, did you choose to be a single person or didn't you choose to be a single person? And I said, no, our life is much more complex than that. And when I proposed that topic, I got some quite harsh reactions from my surroundings.
Which means you're on to something. In academia...
Exactly.
You're either totally wrong or on the cutting edge of understanding something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In my recent study with Michal Kravel-Tovia on self-marriage, people thought we were mad on studying this. They thought we were insane studying this, and it was published in quite a good sociological journal.
Yes.
So I agree with you 100%, and I love pursuing these kinds of topics. So one story I can choose was really an intellectual passion to think about singlehood in a serious way. Mm-hmm. And I hope I did that.
You did indeed. I want to make a couple quick comments. The first one is, I think, may only be relevant and the three of us care about as academics. So there's a saying in academia that it's attributed to Max Planck, which is that scientific progress happens one funeral at a time. And it's because there's sort of this, we all agree on this stuff. And the fact that you agree on all of it kind of constrains the field, whatever field you're in. And so it often takes someone who has either a new perspective, a new approach, who's kind of old enough to know, but young enough to be dangerous, to find these sort of new areas that are being overlooked. And you're often looked as crazy, weird, this is not, And so thank you for doing that work. I've done a little of it with my humor research also, so I've had that same experience. The second thing I want to say is this idea of, I find this too, is relationships in general and family life specifically is so difficult for so many people. People say, relationships are hard. We know about divorce rates and the devastation that goes with this. We know about the abuse that can happen within relationships, et cetera, et cetera. And yet everybody's like, I'm going to do it. I need to do it. And in some parts of the world, almost everybody does it. Or nearly, like, for example, in India, like everybody does it. And then in the United States, nearly everyone does it. Obviously in Europe, much less. But it's sort of striking. It's difficult to find anything that everybody does to the same degree as they do marriage. And yet they do it despite And there's nothing else they do that has the same level of pitfalls.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned this because this commitment with which people do something that they are aware of can be quite difficult and sometimes not end well. It might be the reason that they feel that people respond so strongly if you suggest alternative narratives of relationships of life. I remember once I was telling a colleague about a couple that I know who decided to buy a house and build 2 apartments in the house.
Oh, yeah.
So they wanted to be close, but they wanted their own space, right? And my colleague got very upset. She said, that's immoral. How can you take up a whole house and you make 2 apartments and there's not enough houses to begin with? And I was just so struck by this very visceral reaction that she had. And I think she herself didn't even know what was happening. I think first she had the emotional response and then she tried to make a story around it to justify it. But I think the alternative to maybe her world where she was living in a very small house with 3 children and a husband she might not have liked was really like, oh, I could have done that. I should have done that.
It's
Why did I go?
Yeah.
Down
Look,
this path.
this is how bad it is. I was having a conversation with a married woman who is very happily married. They live in the same house. They sleep in the same bed. They use different blankets. Okay, so one of them has a heavy blanket, one of them has a light blanket because they prefer different temperatures. One of their family members thought that was wrong, right? Found it peculiar and sort of weirdly threatening. So think about like doing anything unconventional. It really goes against a narrative that is so common.
Yeah, and it's so related to, what we both kind of studied, the mixed feelings and especially how you resolve them, right? It's a classic dissonance paradigm. Like, I feel some dissonance because there's alternatives to what I chose. And I must resolve this by doubling down on my opinion and also changing you because you must be wrong. And I must preserve the balance in this sort of hider interpersonal triangle. By the way, in Germany, everybody has 2 duvets on their bed.
Yes, as they should. Because we can't, it's nearly impossible to have the same exact temperature preferences while you sleep.
Yeah. I just want to respond to what you said, which was fascinating. I also think that the therapeutic discourse, the common therapeutic discourses, actually convey the message that marriage and coupledom and parenthood are hard work, and therefore you get moral acknowledgement for being ready to dedicate yourself and involve yourself into that hard work. So in many ways, it's a moral accomplishment. And therefore, you are morally superior because you are willing to engage in this hard work as opposed to these selective single
the
people.
Easy way out. Yes.
Yeah, who are not willing to be engaged in any hard work. They are emotionally lazy. Like they're not putting any effort. They're not going to therapy. They're not really involving themselves. And I think this kind of moral therapeutic ethos is very prevalent in the stereotypes and stigmas towards single men and single women.
Thank you for saying that. Like, I think that, first of all, the idea that like single people aren't grown up, that kind of thing, that they're not doing the hard, is obscene to me for people to say that. We know they're more involved in their communities. They donate more of their time. They donate more of their money. They're more likely to be a caregiver of a parent or other sick family member because the people in the family go, I can't do it. I'm already overwhelmed. And so they're pursuing scientific benefits. They're making art. Single people make the world better also. And they may do it in different ways, and they don't affect climate change as much sometimes.
I think the fact that you actually have all these reasons ready, Peter, also the background of your podcast, I think that in itself is striking, that we have to justify that we also contribute.
Exactly.
That kind of illustrates how strong this idea is. And I think this link with morality is really important because also, for instance, in the work setting, especially in family-friendly work settings, single people are expected to contribute more and be more flexible and assume that they have no responsibilities, that they have no preferences, and that they can kind of move aside to accommodate people with families, which of course they can. But the fact that it's assumed and expected, I think, is kind of reflective of this idea that a single person's life is incomplete, or they have time and they're lazy and they should do more to have this value.
They're doing less important things. Right? Yeah. That's really what this says is, well, you have less important endeavors, and so you can move it around. And the idea that you're not being compensated for your flexibility, for the additional value that you bring is wrong.
But, recently I've been asked what are the social implications of my work, which led me, to think a little bit about my work from a distance. And I'm trying now to develop this idea that I think that singlehood studies and aloneness studies can be a very radical kind of literature and form of thinking. Mm-hmm. For example, why do we need to be adults? Like, why do we need to be significant? Why do we need to work overtime? Why do we need to be flexible of our time? Let's use the single vantage point to change our value systems, to rethink the value system through which single people are, stereotyped and stigmatized. Like, let's rethink the value system which evaluates us and change it from that perspective. Not just say we are not childish. What's wrong with being childish?
Being a child.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, being childish. What could be better than being a child in so many ways? So in these recent weeks, I've been engaging, with thinking, let's use this vantage point that single people offer to rethink the system, just as queer theory has done, just allowing us to reformulate some of the very normative and taken for granted ideas of what is valued and what is devalued, of these kind of hierarchies of values. So this is just an idea I would love to share with you.
Oh my goodness. I have chills right now. Like, I'm about to cry hearing this. I'm being honest. Iris, I want to get to why you're here. I haven't forgotten that. We've jumped right in, which I think is great. I just want to pause for a second because your perspective, what you just shared, is perspective changing in the following way, I think. I mean, for me personally, especially, I think, like, as someone who gets referred to as a Peter Pan sometimes, because I'm 51 now, never been married, no kids, no interest in that. And so this idea that I haven't grown up is sort of, it's seen as a negative thing. And what you're suggesting is that it's potentially a positive thing. And the idea of we lament the loss of play. And I guess I just want to say the other thing is that we live in a world that is built for families. So the time course, the development, the nature of work, everything is built around that kind of thing. And when you strip away having a family, it suddenly gives you a lot more options about how to live your life, both personally and professionally. And I think one of the things that I say time and time again is that solos, they never consider those options because no one ever presents them to them. They never give them to them. You know what I mean? Like this kind of thing. And so what you're suggesting is like, well, what if we just, I'm sorry to editorialize like this, but I don't want this idea to be lost. We should think a little bit about what we want our adult lives to look like. And I don't know, I mean, maybe we can get into that a little bit, but...
Yeah, I want to follow up on this because one question that follows from this is, if we have all these strong values for what it means to be an adult and we want to change them maybe, or at least strip the judgment away, right? Because it's one thing to say being single is a positive and has positive values, but maybe the first step is to stop putting values on different lives and different paths. But the question is, who imposes this idea of adulthood? And one thing that sprung to mind is that I think of these norms about who people are supposed to be are communicated by marketing. That is, families are also, I think, a big target of consumption. They drive the economy. You always see this in policy, right? Families need to be supported, blah, blah. And that's, of course, all because capitalist economies are aimed at growth. So you don't want people who are not adults because they might not buy 2 cars. They might not get a mortgage. They might not follow this consumer pattern. And I think that's why you see all these narratives, although it's a little bit less now that the buying power of singles is being acknowledged. But a lot of these narratives actually come from, I think, commercial interests. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I've actually been thinking a lot about that aspect of consumerism. Because as opposed, for example, to the LGBTQ communities, I've been thinking, how is it possible that the single community, at least in Israel, that's strikingly so, but I think to a certain extent in other places in the world, is still not perceived to be a consumer niche.
Not yet.
Definitely
no.
not
it's coming,
as much.
But not yet.
Yeah, but not as much as the LGBTQ community. But having that thought, I said to myself, well, being as an anti-capitalist person as I am, that is definitely not the path I would like singlehood life to follow and get its recognition and respectability by being a consumer niche. And that follows from the criticism from LGBTQ scholars that say queer life is not about consuming. Queer life is radical. Queer life is by questioning the norms. So I think that these developments which point to, oh, now singlehood, they are worthy consumers. I think it's a tricky and quite dangerous path to take. And I hope single life will not gain its recognition by buying as it happens in so many places. In our consumerist society is where you get your identity and recognition by being recognized as a consumer. And I think that we should pursue this liberty of not being a consumer niche and not look for that recognition and respectability per se. I'm saying don't look for that recognition and respectability from a value system which you do not necessarily agree with.
First of all, we may not want it to happen, but my suspicion is that it very likely will. These are very powerful forces. These are really smart people who are a little bit asleep at the wheel at this moment. My hope is that what it does is, and I teach marketing, so good marketing is about recognizing needs. It's not about creating wants. And so to recognize that singles have a different set of needs and that their value systems may be different. For example, less materialistic, more minimalistic, more experiential, and more flexibility and mobility, that then what you can do is create products and services that make those lifestyle choices easier. That's my hope. I think the other place that we might end up seeing it is also within the world of business, but on the hiring and retention side of things. To Iris's point, I believe that organizations who are in, they're working in a marketplace also, they're trying to acquire the best talent and keep that talent, to recognize how valuable single talent is because they have less constraints. But they may have different values. They might want different things. They may not want to be on a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 because they don't have kids in school. They value remote work more. They might not need to work a 50-hour work week. And so that smart businesses will start to find they don't need family leave to the same degree. So maybe you give them a sabbatical. These are ideas that I've been working on that also will, again, help with the liberation, so to speak. Hey, solo listeners. You know Julie Nervelli from her frequent appearances on the podcast. Well, her latest entrepreneurial venture, Bachelor Girl Productions, is now a sponsor. Bachelor Girl makes fun, flirty t-shirts that serve as an icebreaker when you are out and about. Let the world be your dating app with messages such as spoon size matters or all flirts welcome. You can also wear your Bachelor Girl t-shirt on an actual dating app picture. I recommend the message swipe right for that purpose. Just go to bachelorgirlproductions.com and use discount code SOLO for 20% off your order. That's SOLO in all caps at bachelorgirlproductions.com. Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Bachelor Girl.
I think the employer perspective is very interesting because as I was reading your work, I was also, I don't remember exactly, there was a woman who said, or you said it, that everything that a woman achieves or does, I'm talking about women now because your work is specifically about women and women also carry a stronger tag of singlehood, is considered for the time being. So they go around the world, they get a degree, they master languages, they run a marathon. I don't know, they have friends in different countries. Yeah, but when are you going to get married? And I was wondering about the implications.
So annoying.
Yeah,
it's so annoying.
I was wondering about the implications for that in the workplace, right? So you come there as a single woman and you have this huge CV with both community work and everything. And all the employer is thinking, yeah, but she's going to want to have babies real soon. Because clearly she's waiting for that next step in life. I was thinking, this is actually very harmful in the workplace, even though you might be an easier worker because you require less of the structure that is now in place to support family.
Yeah, I think it taps onto the issue of morality once again, because often when you are single, you are perceived to be dubious, like you're undeciphered. What are you doing in your private life? You're uncontrollable. The boundaries around you are unclear. You're not bounded by the couple unit. You're not accountable to your significant other. So who are you? If you are married, it is clear who you are. And if you are a parent, there are other people who are accountable that you are not as dangerous or not as wild. But as a single person, we have no social indicators of who you are. Mm-hmm. So it also plays in so many arenas as the housing market, as being an employer, an employee. And I think this idea is not something that I don't think I've developed it a lot in my work, but it is something I've been thinking a lot about. A lot in the years I've been studying singlehood. For example, I have this exercise in one of my class in which I tell them that we are a committee for a gated community or for a kibbutz or for like a private community. Mm-hmm. And now we are sitting in this committee of who we can accept to our community. And then I say, well, there is a single man who is 51.
He's tall, he's charming, he's super social, he's living a remarkable life.
Great podcast host.
He's a professor.
Yes.
Okay. And then we have a gay couple with 2 kids. Mm-hmm. And then we have a family with 3 children and a dog. And then we have a widow, a man who is a widower. And then we have a divorced woman with 2 kids. And who do we want in our community? Like, according to which criterias? And then, of course, we play this game. And then I say, but what do we know about these people besides their status? We don't know anything about them. We have no idea who they are. But allegedly, we have a lot of information about them, which derives solely by their status. But we don't know anything about their character, about their ability to contribute to the community or harm the community, if they fit the community. But we have these external markers which indicate that they are safe, that this will be a safer choice. And I think this mechanism just is so prevalent in everyday life, in the way we organize our society, in the way we create these divisions of who is worthy of being near us and who is unworthy, who is dangerous and who is safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, how do I do in that ranking system? Am I like at the bottom?
Pretty bad.
Yeah.
No, you are the least person that community would want. You're a walking catastrophe because there is a high chance that all the women in the community will fall in love with you.
Oh, yeah.
So you are really posing a huge danger to the fabric of the familial atmosphere in that community. You are the least likable person to enter the gate. No chance of you entering the gate. The widower will be a huge success.
Yes, I could see that. So this term uncontrollable, I think, is really fascinating. So you used it with regard to women, but I think it's especially apt when it comes to men. I've done kind of this deep dive into sort of the history of The Bachelor. And, so one of the terms bachelors get referred to as like rogue, like throughout history, like rogue elephants. The idea is that they're useful if you need to fight a war or conquer a frontier. But once the frontier is conquered, once we're settling in, we need to couple these guys up because they're just going to cause lots and lots of problems. And in some cases they do. But the idea that they need to be tamed, there really is a domestication analogy that happens a lot with singles. And I think with the guys, like the term, there's a lot of animal references to single men. So in China, they're referred to as single dogs, been referred to as like oxen. We need to put a harness on them and get them to till the fields. That's where we need them to be. Iris, we're 30 minutes in. People don't even know who you are, why you're here.
I'm 43 years in, and I don't know who I am, so it's okay.
Tell folks how you got here, because you're an academic, but you're not doing research about single living per se. But why have I invited you to be our guest co-host?
Oh, and you asked me. You invited me. So I was interested in, together with a friend, we're talking about like we're both been alone and living alone for a long time, and we share a lot of similar interests, but we also share this frustration on how it's viewed when you're not desperately pursuing some sort of coupling with another person. And she recommended this book. It's called Solo, actually. It's, I think, by a McGraw.
I think it's called Going Solo.
Going Solo, yeah. It's called Going Solo, yeah.
Yes.
And
by Eric Kleinberg.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, this one, yeah. And I thought it was
I'll put
very...
in the exhibits. It's a very good book.
Yeah, it's a good book. And I think he describes something that has been going on and that you can see in many countries happening, that the rise of people living alone. That's also one of his focuses.
Yes.
And I thought this was very interesting. And then I came across Peter's podcast. And of course, I knew Peter from his work on the same topic as I work on, which is mixed feelings and ambivalence. And then I emailed him. And we were talking about in this email also about, the discomfort that comes from feeling a pressure that you don't identify with. I felt from time to time this kind of pressure to finally do something, to finally start my life or to finally achieve something. And I'm quite achieved already. I've achieved something in my life that I think at least is worthwhile. And then Peter sent me your article, and it had this metaphorical connection this connection between time and waiting. And then I just thought, oh, these are not my thoughts. These are not my wants. They're like externally imposed through this strong linear life kind of metaphor that's imposed on people through media mostly, but also through other people who pick up through this media.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And it was such a relief. And then Peter said, do you think it's worth inviting her? And I said, yeah, I do think it's worth. Yeah, I think especially the connection, and it also relates a little bit to what Peter just said, the connection with power. So single women are women who are waiting. People who wait don't have power. And I thought this was a very interesting connection. People who wait don't have power. So you're always waiting on somebody who has more powers. And I thought, especially with what Peter was saying, that's a way to control the uncontrollable by telling them, you don't have power, you're in a waiting, and kind of keeping them in that sort of space.
I have chills again. You two are giving me chills. I'm being honest. People who are waiting don't have power, right? You're waiting on some external thing to happen that's often out of your control.
Yeah. And more than that, the people who are not waiting are superior to you by the mere fact that they're not waiting. So it enables people to say, for example, why are you not married? So you're asking that question from a position of privilege. Or the person who is throwing her bouquet, as I've demonstrated in the article, is clearly in a position of power, in a superior. And this idea of the imaginary queue, of where are you located in the queue? Can you enter the queue at all? Can you participate? Sorry, in the US, it's a line, not a queue. So can you stand in line? Yeah, can you stand in line? Are you eligible at all to wait? And at some point, how far are you, in relation to the bouquet? And at some point, you're not even allowed to participate in this line anymore because you've become older, or you're not reproductive anymore, or you've lost your youth and good looks. So this idea of standing in line was very instructive for me in terms of my thinking of how the single life course is organized according to this pattern. And it made me so angry when I realized that. I said to myself, how dare do they put me in a line? How dare do they put me in line? Like, I refuse to be in this line. I refuse for people to tell me, oh, soon you'll be married. Don't worry. It's like a Hebrew saying, like, bekarov etzlech. It's like, soon, don't worry, you'll get married, or the next wedding will be yours, which is such a patronizing wish, in which the person who wishes you to get married soon actually says, I've been married already. So I can be generous and wish you this same heaven that you should enter. But these ideas are, they seem so normative and natural. And, the person who wishes you to get married only wants what's best for you, but they don't know anything about you and what you want.
I know I cut you off earlier. I'm sorry. I was just so excited. You're shaking your head like you understand this experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even. It's up there with benevolent sexism, like, I just want the best for you. Maybe you shouldn't take on this strenuous job. And what is upsetting about it is that we think a lot about, again, I'm talking specifically about women now, think a lot about why are women not in top tier functions enough? Why don't they go into science? And here at the University of Cologne, there's always like this gender bias discussion going on. Why are women not being professors, et cetera, et cetera. And seeing that in relation to this narrative of disempowering a person who is not yet married, and also in relation to this idea of the third shift, it's basically keeping women busy with the idea that they have to go down this path and spend time and money and resources in order to comply with what this apparently superior person thinks that you should do. That takes away energy from all these endeavors, right? And it's so easily internalized, right? Because it's so connected to self-worth, because, apparently you're not attractive. And that's also it's either you're not attractive or you are too critical. So either nobody wants you or you want nobody, and both are horrible situations to be in, and it has to be kind of remedied. And then the idea that I should be spending time on that, and money even, that I have to get married or maybe have to stay looking young so that I, kind of attract potential mates or whatever, is just so frustrating. And I think it's not just for women. I think this linear life course is oppressive for anybody. Mm-hmm. But I think
it's especially so for women.
Yeah, but this crossover between this, third shift kind of thing, or this...
When you say third shift, I'm used to hearing second shift. So what is the third shift?
I'm sorry, I think I'm messing two things up. I'm talking about that women are not supposed to only live a life, but also live a life where they are very attractive and thin, etc. So all the time they have to kind of spend on being good women in that sense, like looking good. But I think the third shift is actually work, children, and then...
I see.
So it should be the second shift, probably.
I see, yes. It's there used to be a Chanel advertisement back in the day about, she said, I could bring home the bacon and I can fry it up in the pan. And this, super hot blonde woman, you know what I mean? Like, she's good at everything, and so to your point about the third shift was the image of her looking super attractive.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. I was also not sure about the reference, because I know that they also talk about this in the beauty myth, how much time it takes for women to be presentable women, and that actually their economic power is sapped in that way. Are you familiar with this, Peter?
Well, only because I live in LA. And so...
then you're familiar with it, definitely.
So, there are two references. I have an ex-girlfriend who was a journalist, was a reporter on air. And she introduced me to this saying that I often use and is backed up as beauty is pain. So if you see a beautiful woman, she's either in pain or she was in pain or both in order to achieve that. And then the second one is, I remember being at a party with a friend's girlfriend and one of her girlfriends. And we were sitting, and these are early 30s, beautiful women. We got talking about what they do to be this beautiful. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there's just sort of, and the list of things was enormous. And then we started to do was putting price tags on all of these things. And immediately we're in the hundreds of dollars. And then eventually we're in the thousands of dollars. So I am familiar in that sense, as an observer and as someone who pays attention and talks to women about these topics.
Yeah, and I think this combination between this kind of expectation that you should, you're not allowed to be ugly or old, and then the fact that you are being told that you are waiting, I think that's extremely disempowering, and it's so easily internalized that women start holding themselves back, or they start spending time on things that actually are not important to them and shouldn't be important per definition. They can be, and that's fine, but they don't have to be.
Indeed. Yeah. All right, so let's set this up, if I can, just for a moment. So I think there's a little bit of what we call inside baseball going on, because we've read the papers and the books, and obviously Kinneret's written them. So in your book, you juxtapose two fields that aren't typically linked, and that is the sociological study of time and the study of female singlehood. And so what I'd like to sort of move forward is to dive a little bit more deeply. Like, if people think we're nerds right now, we are really about to become nerdy, And so can you talk a little bit about this sort of, I think you've alluded to it, but what is the sort of overarching takeaway of the work? And can you describe a little bit about the methodology you use? So Iris and I come from a psychological background, and I think the average person sort of understands experiments and psychology, but I think that the average person doesn't understand sociology and how these fields are complementary, but they have very different techniques and approaches.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me confess that I'm a proud nerd. That just to,
I know.
When I talk in class, sometimes, I'm so excited when I talk about an article and how I'm so much in love with this paper or with this scholar. And then I say to myself, yeah, I'm a geek. Yeah, definitely. And that's it.
Thank you for that.
Actually, we should reclaim our nerdness. Well, it's an interesting beginning because actually I wasn't planning to engage in the sociology of time. I didn't even know it was a field that existed at that point. My first intention was to write a thesis and to be followed by a book about singlehood and shame and humiliation, about things that bothered me and things that I saw around me. And following what you said, Iris, about the amount of time that women and men invest in thinking, why am I single? Why am I not married? But when I began conducting this research and collecting text, as now I'm also referring to my methodology, I started paying attention that most of the sayings and many of the understandings and interpretations of single life are imbued with notions of time. For example, why are you still waiting? Or you're going to miss that train, or the train has already left, or someday he'll come along, and it's a pity you used to be so pretty. And so many sentences which are imbued with understandings of time. And I said, I have to understand the force of these expressions, of these cliches, of these stories, of these fairy tales, of happily ever after. I have to understand what gives these stereotypes about singlehood, about the conventional thinking about singlehood so much force. And I've understood that the normative and the natural perceptions of timetables and calendars and life course trajectories, in addition to perceptions, temporal perceptions such as wasting time or empty time or losing time or frozen time and age and aging, they play a significant role in the way singlehood is constructed and imagined. And therefore, if I deconstruct these temporal conventions, I can deconstruct the way singlehood is perceived. So I wanted to go as deeply as I could and create this revolution in which I just demonstrate of how socially constructed these conventions are and how they are connected. Each chapter in my book actually takes a different route in which I take one concept, such as waiting or wasting time or empty time, and attempt to understand its origins, how it is demonstrated, and why it is articulated as a truth, as something that we cannot argue with time. No, absolutely, we should argue with time because we as social beings have invented time. And if we have invented time, we can deconstruct and put other ideas into our life course. We can stop waiting. We can stop thinking that we are wasting our time. So I thought that would be a very effective, also in terms of theoretical engagement with singlehood, but also I saw this project, and I still see it, as very political, because in my work, I want to change conventions. I don't want single persons to think that something is wrong with them. No, something is wrong with the value system, which tells you that something is wrong with you, and that should be changed. Not the person.
You are on
themselves.
the right podcast for that.
This reminds me of this saying, the only thing that's wrong with you is that you think that something is wrong with you. But I think what is so powerful about your work is that merely by demonstrating, by laying out how these things are connected and communicating, you're already destabilizing their power, kind of, because they're so familiar, they're like the air around us. And then in your work, you kind of say, yeah, but wait, why do we think about these things in terms of these things, right? Why do these metaphors exist, and what do these metaphors or these ways of talking about this, and what do they tell us about how we think about this construct? And I think that in itself is already eye-opening and opens up the question, okay, but what other kinds of ways can we talk about this? What other narratives are there? And I think the self-marriage thing reclaiming your temporal power is a strong alternative marriage and alternative narrative. And it kind of connects with your ideas also about reframing singlehood, Peter, this kind of temporal agency that people can take back.
Indeed. So as psychologists, we often study time also, and we do so in kind of two different ways in general. So one is this idea of the perception of time. Is it whether it's moving fast or slow, whether something feels close or feels far away, and then implication for things like investing in your future and so on. Those are the kinds of things that happen. I've done some of this work with humor, for example, the passage of time, changes people's emotional experiences and so on. But what you're describing, I'd like to just spend a few more moments on that, just because I think right now it feels very academic. But this idea of it's about sort of perceptions of a life course, about what time means to us, about milestones. Can you talk a little bit more about this idea of the sociology of time in general, and then specifically for singles?
Yeah. Well, how many hours do we have?
I know. I just want to give people a little, I think they sort of are sensing it, but I just want to give them a little bit more of a hunch.
Yeah.
We're single. We have so much time.
Well.
So that's a fantastic question. And my study on singlehood was greatly inspired by works by scholars such as Chaim Chazan and Eviatar Zerubbabel and Norbert Elias and Barbara Adam. And what was really interesting to realize at the point when I began my study on social time, that it was kind of a very marginal kind of subfield in sociology, as opposed to the fascination in so many studies written on space, for example, which is a very recognized subfield in sociology. And I would say roughly that 10 to 15 years ago, it wasn't as popular. And today it is much more known, and there are more publications than it used. At the moment, there are many more studies on social time than it used to be. Really very interesting things being written. But to sum it up very, very short, the idea is that the taken for granted understanding of time as to be natural, as to be self-evident, as to something that just happens and we should adhere to. And the sociology of time understands in historical investigation or by looking at social phenomena, as I did on singlehood and also with my wonderful colleague on late motherhood, in which we look at these sociological phenomena in which temporal notions such as age and moving across the life course are considered to be very normative and natural and binding and authoritative, because you can't do anything about time. You just have to adapt yourself to the life course, or you have to act your age, or you are running out of time, or you should be in time. For example, the notion of timing is very significant. But these are not natural. These are socially imposed constructions which tap with ideological perceptions, with the ideological systems such as capitalism or family life, which bestow a lot of values and a lot of truth claims, as Foucault termed it, about how we should live our lives and what makes our lives worthy. For example, to be in time, or to be married in the right time, or to buy your own place at the right time. And again, we are going back into these ideas of childhood versus adulthood, and are you moral or immoral if you're on time or not on time. For example, and that I can just give you a very brief example of that, of how interesting it is. Think, for example, of the age in which you are supposed to stop living with roommates. Okay? So I assume that in Germany, I would say would it be 30 or 25?
I was never 25 or 30 in Germany, but...
So in Netherlands or in the US?
Yeah, in the Netherlands, it's not so common to live with roommates beyond your studies. Okay. So that would be 25, 26.
I'll add to this. I occasionally on the dating apps, a woman will specifically say something about not having roommates, like that she doesn't want a man who needs roommates, in a sense, has roommates. Yes. Yeah. So, for example, the age in which you were not supposed to live with roommates, that we're supposed to live
on our own or to move on. To move on, what does it mean? To find a partner and to move in together and preferably have your own place. So that is considered to be the most normative channel, trajectory, which signifies being responsible, being happy, this kind of a happy life. But what if you want to stay and live with your best friend?
Sure.
Or what if you get on so well with the person you live with and you don't want to extend this idea beyond the age of 25 or beyond the age of 30? Why not? Who says that at a certain point in our life, we should, live on our own or live with a partner? These kinds of ideas of who we should live with and how we should live are embedded in timetables, which are socially constructed.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.